Welcome again to educator.com, and thank you so much for being prepared and getting stuff written, because now comes the grueling task of proofreading and editing. So let's review the halves of the brain. We all remember what the right brain does, right? Well, it comes up with a lot of ideas. It is extremely creative, and it'll give lots of emotion. What does the left brain do? Well, it edits, organizes, and polishes. Bet you can guess which part of the brain we're going to be working with today. We are going to be editing, so we're using 100% left brain. This is the opposite of those journal entries you did at the beginning. Now we just got to make sure that our ideas are already on paper, and all the left brain is going to do is kind of arrange them, polish them, shape them, make them look better. Because you want your reader to like your paper as much as you do. So, the process of editing kind of goes into what I feel are three basic steps. First off, you got to do the most basic, which is proofreading. And then you have to edit for style. That's a little bit harder, a little bit more abstract. And after you edit for style, you might want to go back and proofread again, but it's usually just once. And finally, the third step is actually very, very important, because writing is a collective thing, is audience input. And I'll tell you a story about audience input later to kind of help you understand how important it is. So one basic rule though. Before you go to steps 1 or 2, finish writing your paper, turn off your laptop, go to sleep. Wait 24 hours between drafting and proofreading. You'll catch things faster that way. I'm not sure why, but that's just kind of how it works. Now, when I proofread, I like to use my black pen, and we're going to see kind of how this works. I have a very poorly written paragraph here that we're going to proofread for mostly grammar, but also for style. Cicero was the very greatest Roman speaker and thinker. I'm underlining my problems right now. I'm using my left brain to find all the problems. He was never afraid to speak up a lot and for justice, morality of the republic. Okay, there's another problem. I think those are too many words. I don't like that. However, after a while, he been? Is that correct? Am I missing something there? So popular that he made a few enemies. Some of his enemies came to him and said, "You're dead." Wait, you're dead? You are dead? Am I using the right your? Is it your as in possessive or your as in you are? You're dead if you don't stop speaking. He didn't shut up. No. This is an academic paper. I'm not going to use the word shut up. I'm going to find something more appropriate. They killed him. Cicero is not speaking for Rome no more. Can you catch the errors there? Can you see how bad that sounds and how just a little bit of editing is going to make that sound a lot better? This is not the grammar course. I'm not going to go over grammar in detail, but what I am going to go over is some of the most common errors, including what I call the grammar cardinal sins, to help you make sure you don't make them. Double negatives. This is a grammar cardinal sin. Never have these in an academic paper. It will look very bad, and your teacher will be shocked. Here are examples of double negatives. He don't eat meat no more. I have never been to no foreign countries. There are no trees nowhere in the desert. We can't think of nothing to do. In each one of these statements, I have a double negative. I have a negation statement said twice. These can be words like no, not, never, nowhere, and contractions, like can't, don't, won't. Never have more than one of these in a single sentence. Now, part of the difficulty of this is that in other languages, a double negative is correct grammar, but in English it is always wrong, and so always look for double negatives. You can say he does not eat meat anymore. You can say something like I have never been to any foreign countries. There are no trees anywhere in the desert. We can't think of anything to do. If you find a double negative, replace one of the negatives just simply with the word any. That usually will solve the double negative problem. You just have to be aware of it. Read the sentence. If you count 2 negation statements, it's wrong. To help you remember, especially for some of you who like math, I know not everybody likes math, think of it this way. In this sentence, I want the result to be a negative statement. So, it's like multiplication. A negative 3 times a positive 3 equals, a negative 3 times a negative 3 is a positive 9. So if I have 2 negations, I've negated the negation, and now I've just said a positive statement. Okay, but if I have a negative 3 times a positive 3, I have never been to any foreign countries. I do get the result I want, which is that negative number. It's a little abstract. If that analogy is not helpful for you, just forget it. Never forget, though, that if you have more than one negation statement in a sentence, one negation word, then you have a double negative, and that is a grammar cardinal sin. Homonyms. Less of a problem, but they'll still make your paper look kind of silly, and that you're not thinking. Homonyms are words that sound the same when you speak them, but they mean different things. So, your and your. One of these is you are, a contraction, which is, 2 words, second person pronoun and a verb, and the other is a second person possessive. Is this your book or my book? Are you the one watching this, or am I the one that is watching this? You are watching this, not me. So those are 2 different usages of the word your. If you have problems with this, if you keep seeing that you're making your and your errors, one thing you can do is just not use a contraction. Instead of writing out your, just always write out you are. It's and its. It's the same story. Did you catch that? I'm sorry, that was terrible. This is the possessive pronoun. Doesn't belong to it. Its book. Its revelations. Its stories. ITS is a possessive. Its apostrophe S is a contraction again. Just like with your and your, if you catch yourself making this error over and over again, just don't use contractions. Say it is. 2, and 2. Another homonyms. So, 2, that's pretty easy. We all know the difference between the number 2. But do we know the difference between this 2 and this 2? This one, number 1, 2, is where I would say I'm going to send the letter to someone. Or I'm about to do a certain action. To do. 2 is example of I am also a student. I am a student too. I have had a lot to eat. I have had too much to eat. Like I said, you can go to the grammar lessons to get really in depth on this, but I'm giving you the most common errors that you're going to run into. There, and they are. Well, you can kind of see I've already split up the contraction for you, because if you split up contractions, you're going to be helping yourself edit. There, that's a possessive again. It belongs to those people. It is theirs. Where are you going? I'm going over there. Who are those people? Well, they are the people who run educator.com. So you can kind of see that there are 3 different uses of the words there, and they are. Again, these are common homonyms. Not too bad, but please avoid them. And the final grammar cardinal sin is the to be verb. This is a very, very difficult thing in the English language. It's because we don't conjugate our verbs too much in English. In Spanish, in Latin, in German, and French, there are 6 different ways to say each verb in one tense. But in English, there's only 2 ways. Unless it's the to be verb, in which case that verb changes all the time. So I've given you an overview of how to use a to be verb, but again, Go back to the grammar lessons to kind of get more details on this one. To use in the present tense, you need to say I am, he, she, or it is, and they are. And you need to be able to see in the past, I was, he, she, or it was, they were. Future, will be, and will be. Past progressive, this is a hard one. Not I been, I have been. Not he, she, or it been, he, she, or it has been. They have been. If you have the word been, B-E-E-N, you can bet that you need to have a has or a have before it. Never just say been. That is an example of not conjugating the to be verb correctly. So, one of the best ways to proofread is actually proofread somebody else's. Now that sounds crazy, but I'm about to explain to you how this is going to work. I mean this. The best way to proofread your paper is to proofread somebody else's. And it's a very, very simple set of steps. Find somebody who's working on your project and is also smart. You don't want the C students, you want the other A students. I mean, let's see, it's up to you. Find the A students and ask them if they want to get their proofreading done faster. And do you know why? Because proofreading your own work takes a long time. It will take you forever. You will have to read the draft 4, 5, 6 times to catch all your grammatical mistakes, and you will still turn in that paper, and your teacher will circle one of yours. I'm not kidding. But if you proofread somebody else's, you will read it once or twice, and you will catch everything. So you just ask them, hey, do you want to get your proofreading done faster? Ask them if they would rather do something else. Ask them if they'd rather play a video game. Ask them if they'd rather play a sport. Ask them if they'd anything else that they'd rather do than proofread that paper. And then you can say, hey, friend, you're such a good friend. I'll just proofread your paper for you. Yeah. And they'll say, really? So, yeah, man, I'm your friend. So let me proofread that for you. I'll circle all your mistakes. And they'll say, oh, wow, thanks. Yeah, that'll go much faster. Oh, by the way, do you mind proofreading my paper? Because we'll both get it done a lot faster. If anybody says, if you do all these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you get to this 5, and they still say no, it's time to find new friends. But if you got good friends and you got people working on the same project, I guarantee they will not say no to this request. So instead of reading a paper 4 or 5 times for proofreading, not for style, you will just read it once or twice, and then your own paper will be read once or twice, and oh man, it'll be just so much easier. Now, as an addendum, some English teachers will tell you, proofread your own work. And if your English teacher and if your instructor says that, then do what your instructor says. But I'm here to tell you that when I was in graduate school, which was education after college and then beyond, our grad students, we all proofread each other's papers, and our professors who have PhDs said, it's a good idea. Keep doing that. Just saying. Now, editing for style is a completely different thing. You do want to edit your own papers for style. And editing for style follows William Strunk's Elements of Style, which is a free book you can find online that was published in around 1910 and is still used today. I'm not giving you all the rules, but I'm going to go over some guidelines with you. Ready? Rule number 9 of elementary composition. As a rule, begin each paragraph with a topic sentence and end it in conformity with the beginning. This is a great fancy way of saying make sure that each paragraph has a major supporting detail, and that major supporting detail is set clearly in the topic sentence. If you've already gotten used to organizing your essays, you are already following this rule. So, let's go on to the next rule from Strunk and White's. Strunk and White's, use active voice. What is active voice? Well, let's figure out what passive voice is first. The race car, subject, was driven by the racer. The message, subject, was delivered by Hedwig. It, subject, is defeated by Meg. No, 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 no. This is passive voice. This is a subject receiving the action, not the subject of the sentence doing the action. You want to make sure your sentences have the subject doing the action 9 times out of 10. Let's try it with active voice and see how this sounds. The racer drove the race car. Hedwig delivered the message. Meg defeats it. Wow, which sounds better? Active voice sounds better. You know why? Because with these passive voice things, I don't need to worry about the racer or Hedwig or Meg at all. The race car was driven is a complete sentence. But it's a boring sentence and it doesn't tell us anything. It's not very good. It sounds like lawyer talk. Use active voice. Make sure that the subject of the sentence is doing the action, not receiving the action. Go check out the grammar if you need more details on that. Okay, number 12. Put statements in positive form. One of the reasons why we like to put statements in positive form is you can't actually prove a negative. So if you're writing an argumentative paper, you really want to work hard to make a positive claim and then try to prove that. You can't prove a negative. Also, we put statements in positive form because it sounds better, and I'm going to demonstrate why. They have no families in Brave New World. Negative, no families. The Death Eaters are neither kind nor good. I'm telling you what the Death Eaters are not. I'm not telling you what kind of people they are, though. Just telling you they're not kind or good people. He did not think that the movie was very fun. Okay, well that's great. I know what he didn't think about the movie, but what did he think about the movie? That's the information you want to give your reader. Active voice. Families are forbidden in Brave New World. Much better. I've taken a negative statement and I've put it in positive statements. The Death Eaters are mean and cruel. Hey, that was easy. I just picked words that are the opposite of kind or good, and I said the Death Eaters are those things. It's much easier, don't you think? He thought the movie was boring. Okay, now I'm not left hanging. I know he doesn't think the movie's fun, but I also know what he think the movie was. He thought it was a sleeper. So I made negative statements and put them in positive form. Here's my favorite part. Omit needless words. This is basically a way of telling you, don't waste your reader's time. Don't waste your reader's time. So I'm actually going to read this whole sentence from Strunk and White's, which you can read yourself because it is so important. Especially when we want to cheat and we want to add more words to, get to a word count. Let's go ahead. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences. For the same reason, a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires the writer to make all sentences short and that he avoid all detail and treat his subject only in outline, but let that every word tell. Now, I'm going to show you an example of a paragraph that has needless words, and then I'm going to show you a paragraph that has no needless words, but it's going to be the same sentence. Here it goes. Psychology is a subject that studies the human mind. One of the most famous psychologists in history was a man named Carl Jung. Carl Jung studied the human mind. One of the many theories he gave us was introversion-extroversion. Another theory was called the collective unconscious. One of the greatest contributions, which stands out above all the others, is called individuation. Are you bored? Does that paragraph bother you? Well, it would bother a reader too. Here's a couple problems. One of the most famous psychologists in history was a man named Carl Jung. Carl Jung studied the human mind. What do psychologists study? They study the human mind. If the reader knows that, I don't need this sentence here at all. One of the many theories he came up with was introversion-extroversion. Okay. I could just scratch out he gave us, and I could just say was introversion-extroversion. Here's another problem. One of his greatest contributions, which stands out amongst all the others. Okay, what does it mean to be a great contribution? The greatest. Is it going to stand out above others? Is it going to be noticed? Yes. So I'm really just repeating myself, aren't I? Okay, so I'm going to chop this sentence off. I'm going to take a razor and I'm going to cut out everything that's not needed so that my reader doesn't hate me. Psychology studies the human mind. One famous psychologist was Carl Jung. One theory he gave us was introversion-extroversion. Another theory was called the collective unconscious. One of his greatest contributions is known as individuation. Wow, that was short and sweet, right? Maybe it's a little boring. Maybe I'm not being very emphatic. But I'll tell you what, that has no needless words. And if a reader just wants to know what you're thinking, you've really, really helped that reader. And you're going to get a better grade if you write like that instead of the paragraph on the previous slide. So here's a way that you can think about compositions for 13 on omitting needless words. 1. For every needless word, imagine that you're going to get 0.5% of a grade raise. That means if you cut out 20 needless words, that's a difference between a B and an A. Also, you could imagine it this way. For every needless word you omit, you get a quarter. I'd love to give you a quarter for every needless word you omit, but maybe you can get a deal with your parents or with your teachers and say, hey, for every needless word I make and I have a quarter, maybe they won't do it, but even if they don't, just imagine it. And you'll be highly motivated to find ways to make a 12-word sentence into, just 8 or 7. And you can, and you will. Now, here's another one. Avoid a succession of loose sentences. This one's a little bit harder to understand. What is a succession of loose sentences? Well, it's any sentence that uses a lot of these. And, but, who, where, which, what, and while. If you got a lot of conjunctions and a lot of words connected together, those are called run-on sentences, and your paragraph shouldn't have a lot of those. Here's an example of a very poorly written paragraph that has a succession of loose sentences. And it's going to sound bad. The third concert of the subscription series was given last evening, and a large audience was in attendance. Mr. Edward Appleton was a soloist, and the Boston Symphony was furnished the instrumental music. The former showed himself to be an artist of first rank, while the latter provided its fully deserving of its high reputation. Okay, I don't want to read that anymore. I'm already like this. I want to just, kind of never read again. I want to scratch my eyes out. This is painful to read. So, how do you avoid writing a paragraph like this? When you're editing for style, look at a paragraph. How many times do you use a conjunction like and? Or a sentence like while? Or a word like while? Or but? Or because? If you've got more, if you're using those more than, say 2 times out of 5, or, 2 times out of 6 even, you're using it too much. If you have a paragraph that has 8 to 9 sentences, no more than, I think, 3 of those should have a conjunction like and, but, while, where, who, etc., etc. Please, 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 for the sake of your English teachers and for your grades, avoid a succession of loose sentences. This is very important for rhetoric. Rule number 18, place the emphatic, emotional words at the end. So, remember, emotional words don't need to be omitted, but if you're using them, you need to use them carefully. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, but was still a great president. My emotional words are here, owned slaves. That's pretty emotional, right? So I'm going to change that. I'm going to put the emphatic words at the end. Thomas Jefferson, despite being a great president, owned slaves. Got your attention, right? I use the emphatic emotional words at the end. It was a terrifying enemy from which Meg rescued her brother. Boring sleeper sentence. Don't write like that. Meg rescued her brother from it, the terrifying enemy. Much better. Emphatic words at the end. And that just means emotional. So, that's so much for Strunk and White, but there's one other thing you have to do. Step 3, audience input. I want you to think about when you start writing your opinion papers, when you start arguing, when you start using rhetoric. This is going to be so important. It's hard for people to understand arguments, especially when they get really complicated. And that's one of the reasons why we need audience input. When I was in graduate school, I was writing a paper, and I'm going to give you the subject, on how God's timelessness conflicts irrevocably with man's free will. Does that sound boring? Does that sound complicated? You bet it does. And so because I knew it was that complicated, I wrote a draft on my blog and say, here's my argument. And I sent that blog to a bunch of friends and said, hey guys, does this make sense to you? Have I explained myself well enough? I got audience input back. And one of my friends said, I've heard this argument a lot, and this is the first time it's made sense. I don't agree with you, but I think your arguments are good and rational. If you get something like that, where somebody says, I don't agree with you, I don't like this subject, but it's all clear and I understand you, you've done it. You've written a good paper. But you'll never know that without audience input. So find a friend, find a teacher, find your mom and dad, find anybody and say, please, please, please read my paper. I'll read yours. Did they get it? Did they understand the subject as well as you understand the subject? If they do, win. So, can someone else understand your definitions and illustrations and keywords? Think about everything that we've been doing as far as reading. If you gave them a black pen or a yellow pen and said, I want you to circle all the transition words and illustrations that I have, can they find them? If they can, win. If you give reasons to believe something, does someone else think that those are good reasons? We're going to be moving into logic, and we're going to be moving into rhetoric. And if you're arguing a certain point, like, I think Brave New World has a very good method of social control and a great way to eliminate crime and conflict from society, you better hope that when you're saying something that crazy that you have some good reasons so you don't sound like nuts. Also, your audience, the person who reads it for you, can give you suggestions. They will read it. Maybe somebody else knows something about Brave New World that you don't. And they've read your paper, and they're going to say, you've written a great paper. You've written a lot of things, but have you ever considered, this and this and this? And then you're going to think, I never did thought about that. Maybe I need to redraft part of my paper to make it much better. Maybe I need to add a paragraph just to address this objection that somebody has. But most of all, if somebody else just loves your paper, they get it, they know your definitions, you've written an A paper. So that's what the audience input is all about. So what I'd like you to do now is read through the rules and examples for elementary composition at Strunk and White. This is a book that's available for free online. You can Google search it, but we also got links. There's a reason why this book has been used for over 100 years. And one of them is that it's free, but also because it's easy. Then take that paper you've written, and I'd like you to go through the proofread process. I'd like you to edit it for style and get audience input on it. Remember, if you're proofreading, you will get it done faster if you proofread somebody else's and they proofread yours. If they're a good friend and you frame it exactly like I showed you, I promise they are going to work with you. Editing for style, that's more on your own. Follow those rules from Strunk and White's. Use your judgment, be very critical. Don't add any new ideas, but just edit and shape your current ideas. Finally, after you've done those things enough, get that audience input. And if that person loves your paper and understands what you're saying as well as you think they should, you've done it. You've written an A paper. So, really wish I could grade them yourselves, and I really wish that I could see those A's, but I know that your English teachers are just going to be so happy when you do all this. Thanks again for using educator.com.